First off, welcome again to the Research Symposium. My name is Justin Pasquale. I'm a rising senior here in Falls College. I am studying nutrition science as my major. I intend to complete a PhD program in nutrition immunology with a future goal of working for NASA as a nutrition immunologist. Which brings us here to my research topic of today, a meta-analysis in spaceflight nutrition, vitamin D's role in immune system regulation. So for a quick preamble, in 1961, the first human got launched into space. His name was Yuri Gagarin of Russia's space program. Since then, we've been conducting space-based research and gathering a lot of benefits here on Earth from that research. Over the past 57 years of spaceflight, we've also got to learn a lot about how the human body adapts to these types of space stressors. But little is still known about how the human immune system is affected by space stressors. What we do know is that since those first flights, those first years of Mr. Gagarin and continued on to today, human astronauts, cosmonauts, and animal subjects have been leaving Earth, going into orbit, and coming back with immune system dysregulation. The good news is that ground-based studies have shown that certain micronutrients can be used as protective factors against these abnormalities in our immune system. One of those micronutrients is vitamin D. And so I will conduct a quantitative meta-analysis to build an in-depth understanding of how we can use micronutrients, specifically vitamin D, as a protective factor against immune dysfunction while exposed to spaceflight stressors. So like I said, the history of spaceflight has granted us opportunities to reach scientific benefits here on Earth, and I'd like to cover a couple of those benefits really quickly with you. So the first one is increased medical care to remote locations. What we see in this image is a physician conducting an ultrasound on his patient's heart, and he's doing that through way of a laptop. So mobilization of medical equipment of this advanced style was not possible prior to spaceflight science. In about 2001 is when this one kind of got introduced. Another one in the medical field is the NeuroArm. This one's pretty cool. This one is based off of the ISS robotic arm, the International Space Station robotic arm. This allows neurosurgeons to conduct surgery on their patients while their patient is inside of an MRI machine. So this very advanced, very technical piece of equipment here was not possible prior to spaceflight science. And lastly is a more, I would say, global, general impacts from space-based research, and that's water purification technologies and techniques. We use this in areas where populations don't have access to clean drinking water. We use these techniques and technologies after natural disasters and the relief efforts to bring water back into those areas. So these are just a few examples of how science and space has benefited us on Earth, and it kind of impressed upon us the importance of having healthy astronauts conducting this research in space. So how do we keep them healthy? How do we keep them active in the research scheme of things? Well, first we have to understand the immune system. And for a quick overview, there's two types of immune systems that make up our overall immunity. The first one is your innate immune system, and the second is your adaptive. Really quickly, you can think of your innate immune system as the frontline fighters. They're going to just kill anything and everything that comes and try to get you in trouble and take you down, right? When they fail, when they get breached by antigens, they call them the adaptive immune system. And these guys are highly trained SEAL Team 6 killers of antigens, right? These guys go after the high priority guys. And if either of these fail, we call that immune dysfunction. We can identify immune dysfunction by looking at these immune biomarkers here. These are the main four, although there are others, but these are the main four that we typically look at. If these are underreactive, that's immune dysfunction, so they're not doing their job, they're depressed. If they're overreactive, that's immune dysfunction. They're hyperreactive. We don't want that either. So this is very critical to know throughout the rest of the presentation, because this is how clinical studies, physicians identify immune dysfunction within their studies. So with that said, how do spaceflight stressors affect those immune systems and cause dysregulation in those biomarkers? Well, I'd like to start this one off with a quote from Dr. Krushin here. He's the head immunologist at NASA Space Center in Houston, and I quote him saying, "Spaceflight exposes astronauts and cosmonauts to physical and psychological stressors such as radiation, microgravity, stress, and altered sleep cycles, which affect astronauts' immune systems." I think this is very important to bring up right now, because this kind of starts to bring home the fact that we're not so different from our brothers and sisters spaceflight as far as stressors go. Although a lot of us don't experience radiation, there is demographics here on Earth that study with nuclear reactors and things of that nature. So they're exposed to this. They may experience immune system dysregulation because of it. Microgravity, that affects pilots. people who spend their time in water, such as underwater welders, scuba divers, our Navy seamen, so a big part of our military there, as well as patients who are mobilized. They don't have the means to be able to move around, they experience this stressor. And stress and altered sleep cycles, that one really hits home because we've all experienced some type of stress, some type of altered sleep cycle, and this may affect the immune system. So how do these stressors affect us on the immunity level? Well, Sonnenfeld in 1999 found through a meta-analysis of animal and human subjects that when exposed to these spaceflight stressors, there was a decrease in lymphocyte blastogenesis, or production. Cytokine production was decreased, as well as leukocyte and natural killer cell activity was decreased. So we're seeing an immunosuppression here. Kelson in 2012 conducted a 21-day ground-based experiment where he had patients set up into, it's called a 6-degree head-down bed rest position, where literally the patient's head is 6 degrees lower than their feet. This is a setup that makes it analogous to microgravity in space. And through this, they found that immune dysfunction was defined by decreased production of immune markers and increased incidence of infection. And that's critical because this was only a 21-day study. That's a small window to be exposed to these stressors. A typical space flight to the ISS is 6 months, and it can last, the record right now is 1.8 years. So just by way of exposure, by time of exposure to these stressors, it's implied that every astronaut going to the ISS will experience some type of immune dysfunction. This last one here, Dr. Smith, he is the lead scientist in the Nutritional Science Lab at NASA in Houston. Him and his team conducted a meta-analysis and a quantitative experiment in 2015 looking at pre, intra, and post-flight blood work of the astronauts. And through that finding, they found that there were significant changes in circulating leukocytes and altered production of cytokines, as well as decreased natural killer cells and T cells. So 2 quick themes I'd like to point out here from this slide is that what we're seeing is that exposure to these stressors is a decrease or a depression of the immune system. We're not seeing a hyperreactivity of the immune system, so that's kind of key there. But we're also seeing that since 1999 to present day, this depression of the immune system is consistent. Even though we've been able to evolve in equipment and spaceflight technology, we still can't grasp exactly why or how this is happening. So what does that look like in space? This chart here just shows us the impact of immune dysregulation. This is some numbers from 1981 to 1998 during the Space Shuttle program. And 141 astronauts during that time reported injuries or trauma. 83 reported respiratory system failure. And 26, last but not least, 26 reported were actually diagnosed by NASA physicians with infectious disease. All of this is very important because once we have immune dysregulation in space and these instances of medical events occur, that's impact to time on task, mission, research, loss of money. And when these astronauts come back home, that impacts the rehabilitation time and could potentially keep them quarantined away from family and things of that nature. So it's important to keep us healthy up there, keep our astronauts healthy. How can we do that? Well, we can look at vitamin D or other micronutrients, but in this case, vitamin D in the immune system. I'll start this one off with a quote as well from the Institute of Medicine. Epidemiological studies have found an association between vitamin D deficiency and an increased risk of colon, breast, and prostate cancer. So vitamin D seems to be important in the immune system. I read this, I thought, cool, how do I get some? Sources of vitamin D. The 2 main sources for the human body is ultraviolet B rays and dietary supplements and fortified food. So that's your sunlight, and then that's just consumption orally. Astronauts don't get a whole lot of sunlight, so the primary consumption is going to be through oral ingestion. The recommended intake is 15 micrograms per day. We can test to see if you're sufficient by drawing blood. If you're within 20 to 50 nanograms of vitamin D per 1 milliliter of blood, you're sufficient. Anything lower than 20 nanograms, and you're deficient. In 2005, the recommended intake of vitamin D from Dr. Smith's lab at NASA for astronauts was 10 micrograms per day. And that's the most current information I could find on that, but 10 micrograms per day. So what does that look like actually in practice? So 10 micrograms per day when sent up into space. This chart shows us that pre-flight, the astronauts were measuring on average 25.4 nanograms per milliliter, which puts us in that pleasurable window of 20 to 50. So they're good, they're nice and healthy. This red line indicates the deficiency line, but when we recaptured them from space flight, they were measuring 19.1 nanograms per milliliter. So something from launch to recapture caused a deficiency in vitamin D. What does that mean to the human body? Aronel showed through a meta-analysis that vitamin D coordinates multiple functions in both the innate and the adaptive immune systems. So without sufficient amount of vitamin D, your immune system goes a little bit haywire, that frontline warrior and those SEAL Team 6 guys can't cooperate and put you at risk for infection. Cradle found through a meta-analysis, quote, vitamin D supplementation has beneficial effects on immune function, in particular to the context of autoimmunity. That's important because, again, supplementation is the primary way for vitamin D to make it to our astronauts. Van Waving found through his meta-analysis that animal-based studies and human-based studies, vitamin D consumption enhances immunity even when sunlight exposure is limited. Again, very important for astronauts. Lastly, Martineau found through an experimental study of human subjects that vitamin D consumption enhances immunity and further confirms that it can be used as a preventative measure against tuberculosis. So that just brings home how important vitamin D in the immune system is and why deficiency is a bad thing. So that brings me here to my research question. We know that spaceflight induces immune dysfunction, mainly in immune depression. Also, that vitamin D can be used as a protective factor within the immune system. So my research question then is, can vitamin D be used to decrease immune dysfunction in human and animal subjects during exposure to spaceflight stressors? To answer this question, I'm going to be conducting a meta-analysis. I'll be looking at two search categories, vitamin D and immune system function and spaceflight and immunity. I'll be using PubMed, ScienceDirect, and the National Institute of Health as my databases. All publicated articles must be in English and between 1961 and 2008. I'll also use hand searching of reference lists and contacting prominent researchers in the field for unpublished work. This is just a quick chart to show what keyword search results will look like. So my ORs are like vitamin D, vitamin D3 in technical terms, spaceflight and microgravity. My AND keywords are immune function and immunity, and then the total amount of those keyword combinations will fall into these end blocks here. Inclusion criteria for category 1 is they must be randomized control studies with an independent variable of intake of vitamin D3. Category 2 must be quantitative experiments, either with flight or analogous ground-based studies looking at pre, intra, and post-flight blood work. Independent variables, spaceflight stressors, vitamin D3 intake, and these can be human or rodent subjects. And the immune system function identified by immune biomarkers will be the dependent variable for both of these categories. Data extraction, I'll read each article, extract data using a template. I'll be looking at cytokine concentration, vitamin D3 intake, and stressors. It'll get put through statistical software and then synthesized onto an example, forest plot like this example here to test for statistical significance. So qualities, the strength and limitation qualities of this is, my strengths currently are the quality of articles looking at RCTs and human and rodent subjects only, as well as the amount of studies included. As a minimum, it's going to be 40 to 50. Limitations, I'm the only reviewer, so that's going to affect the extraction of data, maybe some accuracy and consensus, typically like 2 or 3 interviewers or investigators on this. My progress report now, I've conducted review of 22 studies for my meta-analysis. Through that, I've been able to identify a clear research gap in this field, and I've developed a research design and stated my research question. I've also attended the 2018 University of Buffalo McNair Conference, where I was able to attend fellow scholar presentations, but mainly I conducted networking and gained insight on how to conduct meta-analysis and also how to conduct experimental studies, some very critical techniques in both those fields. So my timeline is broken up into two. I have a fall and I have a spring timeline. For my fall timeline, again, I have to identify a methodologist and a mentor. And with my mentor, I will identify the minimal number of articles I need from meta-analysis. My mentor and or a methodologist will help me create that number. I don't know exactly how much that's going to be yet, but we'll also create a data extraction template to review each article. I'll conduct and review all the articles using that template by winter break this fall. Spring, I'll use that data that I pull out of each article. I'll synthesize it, put it through my statistical analysis software, get that onto a forest plot for statistical significance, and then it will be ready. I'll write it up, and then it'll be ready for a presentation at the annual McNair Research Symposium in May 2019. And with that, I would just like to close with a couple of acknowledgments. A big thank you to Christabel Sheldon and Lauren Malloy, also Professor Thorley and Professor Kim, and my McNair scholars. It's been a good summer with y'all. So thanks for hanging on. Now I'd like to open the floor for any questions that you may have.
If in the future, after your meta-analysis, and you would like to probably conduct an experiment on this, have you thought about where you'd like to go with that experiment?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, so this is the first step in a long journey, what I hope is going to be a long journey of developing knowledge on this subject matter. So experimental studies in the future will include first in vitro studies, where we'll look at blood cell types and try to separate those blood cells and expose them to microgravity environments. Just don't have the capacity to do that here. It's meta-analysis. But I would like to be able to separate certain immune cell types, whether that's leukocyte or natural killer cell, and test those against certain antigens after having them be exposed to hyper supplementation of vitamin D, and see how that works. Just simply here on base and on Earth-based studies, and then we can translate that to microgravity, near microgravity, and hopefully one day have the ability to test that in space, but we'll see how that goes. It's commercializing. NASA is going commercial, so hopefully we'll get more exposure to space flight. That's pretty good. Yes?
There are other, and maybe you said this among all the technical words, are there other sort of vitamin deficiencies that you've seen in your readings or vitamin D is most prevalent? Why? Do they have any other why?
In astronauts?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of vitamin D and mineral deficiencies. Vitamin E is one, C is another one. And E and D are main because they're fat soluble. And so it's just, it kind of stems out from a long thing. But a quick overview is astronauts aren't eating the required dietary guidelines, so they're not eating what they're supposed to be eating. And that can be a whole slew of things. Because of that, they're not storing fat soluble vitamins. And this is one of those fat soluble vitamins. Also, E is one as well. These are both antioxidants and hormonal vitamins. But one of the confounding variables, I guess you could say, or moderating variables, is calcium and magnesium. So, future, again, to kind of pick up on that one that Margie asked, a future study would look at vitamin D's ability to enhance bone marrow density, and that's kind of where I'm heading way down the road, because bone marrow density affects vitamin E, calcium, magnesium, things of that nature, and there's just a lot of moving parts there. But yeah, there's a lot of nutrient deficiencies happening, and it stems with just not eating. They're not eating, and we don't know why exactly. But yeah, yes.
Because I read your paper, you did a really good job, and yeah, I enjoyed listening to your presentation. And my question is, compared to other meta-analysis you found, what makes your study distinctive from these studies?
Yeah, so the meta-analysis that I found, it kind of correlates with the two categories that I have going on in my meta-analysis. There's only been meta-analysis done on ground-based studies on vitamin D and the immune system, and the meta-analysis done on spaceflight stressors effects on the immune system. We haven't been able, there's big gaps in the literature on how vitamin D can be used as a protective factor in the immune system. So what I want to do is create a more understanding about these spaceflight stressors and what type of physiological systems are actually causing disruption in. So whether that's endocrine system, immune system, maybe it's the bone that's happening, so some type of osteoporosis going on, and how vitamin D on Earth reacts in those systems. So I can make the link and see if vitamin D can help us out up in space as well. So, but that kind of ties back to also making sure that they're actually taking their vitamin D supplements and eating their food. So yeah, it's that gap. There's not been a crossover of those two styles of meta-analysis. That's going to happen. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions?
All right, thanks, Justin.
Thank you.
The next presenter will start in 6 minutes. Just so that you know, we will stay with the schedule. There are times when people come to see specific individuals. So even if someone finishes early, we will not start early.
Thank you.
Christine, you're up next, right?
Yeah. Just remember how to say it.
Has anyone been able to contact or connect with Marlene?
I didn't talk to her, but this is
Do you want us to message her for you?
Yeah, she needs to upload her presentation. I haven't seen it.
No, I threw it out.